Hello everyone, and welcome to this pre-recorded webinar for Third Sector Collaboration Week, which is being held between 30th of August and 3rd of September. Third Sector Collaboration Week aims to raise awareness of collaboration and the different methodologies or approaches that can be used to develop new partnerships. Each day of the week will focus on how collaboration can deliver on key Scottish Government policy areas. And one of the days focuses on looking at examples of collaboration from outside Scotland and outside the UK. So for that reason, today's webinar features Antonio Pisano from La Polveriera, which is a shared co-working space and hub in Reggio Emilia, Northern Italy, focusing on urban regeneration and redevelopment of cultural heritage. So I'm shortly going to ask Antonio to introduce himself and then do a presentation on the collaboration model, which has been adopted by La Polveriera, and that will be followed by a short discussion. So Antonio, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Neil. It's been absolutely a pleasure to be part of this wonderful conference or e-conference. Just to quickly introduce myself, I am an architect. My passion is with sustainable and kind of social value adding design. We started my practice at the time was only based in London in the UK. We then expanded in Europe. We are almost entirely now operating for Europe at the moment. At the time it was 2012, I think, and we started really just trying to understand how such a complex and inspirational project could take off. And our role has kind of, I would say, exceeded the strict domain of our professional consultancy. You know, such a complex, multi-layered client needs more than just a normal design consultant. So stakeholder engagement, evolving dynamic briefing process are key parts to handle the complexity. So it's been a roller coaster and a great learning curve. But I think that project, which started so long ago and is still kind of ongoing because there's always new creativity and new answers, that project truly has been our inspirational exercise. It started as a design element and it became much more than that. In a way, we refer back to Polveriera in every single urban regeneration project, and it's quite rare, and I suppose this would be the exceptional element that my pre-recorded presentation will highlight. One of the elements it will highlight. The exceptional element of this urban regeneration project is the fact that it's the third sector alone is the proponent. So the third sector, the cooperative movement, the NGOs and the not-for-profit become an urban developer. And that was quite ambitious and challenging and kind of rewrote the rules of urban regeneration.
Thank you for that. So now I'm going to move on to Antonio's presentation, which will be followed by a short discussion afterwards.
Good afternoon. My name is Antonio Pisano. I am an architect, and I am kind of representing today the complex world of La Polveriera in Reggio Emilia in Italy. And I say complex using that word carefully because there's a fair amount of complexity going on in this project. I am thrilled and very honoured to be part of the Third Sector Collaboration Week. Hashtag collaborate to innovate, and we do hope that sharing our 10 years long lesson learned on how to run a multidisciplinary third sector hub in Italy might prove useful in comparing notes on how to improve social innovation for social change. I will be taking you through a fairly dense and quite rich presentation, which moves from the presentation I gave at the New European Bauhaus maybe a month ago in Brussels, where the Polveriera was showcased as one of the most interesting examples of social innovation in Europe. So without further ado, I will now switch the camera and start with our presentation, and I hope you find that interesting. Thank you. So first things first, I'm just going to take you quickly through a Google Earth animation just to share where Polveriera is on our beloved blue planet. Polveriera is in Reggio Emilia. Reggio Emilia is a city of Roman foundation in the region of Emilia-Romagna in the north of Italy. It is a middle-sized city of about 200,000 inhabitants, and the Polveriera is part of a project of urban regeneration for a former military area. So those long warehouses you can see in the 3D model once belonged to a military area. La Polveriera is the name of the project, is also the name of the overall governing entity that manages the estate. La Polveriera comprises of many different NGOs and social enterprises and cooperatives. All cooperatives belong to the Consorzio Oscar Romero, which has been our initial client. I am part of a CAIRE Consorzio, which is also a consortium of companies, primarily urban planning, architecture and engineering companies. Our engagement as professional consultants, as I have to say, gone possibly beyond the normal domain of architectural design services, including element of community engagement, stakeholder engagement, and so on and so forth. And I think that going beyond the domain of professional consultancy is an integral part of designing something like this. Complexity is part of the game when the third sector become a real estate developer. Starting from why. Why is Polveriera emerged? Why has he emerged? So primarily to answer a growing demand of social services, which normally would be cast away far away from the center, where real estate values and rents were more approachable. So it comes from an opportunity to convert an underperforming asset, which was a public asset, which will remain a public asset through a lease type agreement for 50 plus 10 years. And in so doing, the creativity of the third sector has become the enabler and the catalyst for urban regeneration change. And in so doing, by taking on the risk of such an ambitious project, third sector organization have once again gained central stage in urban regeneration, basically being able to set their headquarters a stone throw away from the city center. Moving from why to when. Initially, the estate, so the military area, was developed in 1940s. It was handed over from the army to the local authority in the 1990s and was kind of not particularly well used until 2009, when a public-led master plan called for new ideas on how to use the space. The Consorzio Oscar Romero won the bid, and then design started. Today, the building looks like this. It is completely renovated. It has been a particularly satisfactory design, also from the architectural point of view, because the building is grade 2 listed, and the negotiation with local authority has been fairly challenging, I should say. But as a result of this challenging and enriching relationship, a pretty nice piece of city has been restored. Internally, the construction integrated element of sustainable design, such as dry construction, cross-laminated timber, and energy-saving systems. And really, the architectural design is meant to set back and disappear in order for the true life of the building's occupiers to emerge. So it's a very simple and very kind of clean sort of design. And as the life of the building emerged, really interesting things started to appear. So as what you see here is the, let's say, the empty building of the two. So the warehouse is made out of two symmetrical warehouses, about 80 meters long and 15 meters deep. And one of them has a mezzanine floor, so it's got basically more room, and the other one is been left empty. And the empty one is also the co-working space, the restaurant, and the cultural venue, as you can see in this slide here. And this is another shot as you enter in the co-working and bar area, which is very popular also at night and in the summer. And so more in detail, what is it? So from stored weapons, as I said earlier, the building has now become a place, a safe haven for nurtured relationships. It is a care home and an assisted home, offers services to fragile individuals like former inmates, victims of abuse, former prostitutes, so on and so forth. It is a place for artisans, makers, and has a design shop. It is a restaurant and co-working space, and most importantly is the headquarter for many cooperative and third sector organizations, and has a dense and vibrant and rich program of music and events. As I mentioned initially in the introduction of this presentation, our aim is to share with you our 10 years long lesson learned, so that if someone out there wants to do something similar, may do different mistakes from the one we did. So we're trying to, share lesson learned to improve collectively the third sector impact on social value. The first element we learned the hard way is scalability. So in order for this to scale up, in order to have a movement of third sector led, social enterprise led urban regeneration, it is very important to align with local authority policies. And more than that, it's very important that the local authority embraces the long-term aim of such operation as an overarching objective that might be picked up when the political kind of tide changes and a different political representation may run local affairs. So it's really important that the long-term social value is embraced by the local authority beyond the simple time frame of a political group. If the political support to such a complex and fragile operation ceases to exist, it becomes extremely difficult for a third sector organization and cooperatives to run the show. Because obviously, when your purpose is not only profit, everything becomes harder, and as many of you know. It's a team made of people able to handle complexity, again, because there's so many different business cases, and it's not actually about just business, but it is a multi-tiered impact which is sought after. People need to be able to handle complexity and constantly manage and rearrange the list of priorities. It is necessary for people to be curious and problem-solving oriented, because again, it is a complex issue. In terms of investment, Polveriera represents quite a substantial investment. We're talking about between 4 and 6 million. It also involves a very long-term payback. So this is not for business as usual sort of business cases. As I mentioned earlier, Polveriera involved a 50 years plus 10 lease with the local authority, which is a fantastic achievement because the third sector operator has time to basically make the money back and get their finance in place, but also the community and the local authority basically at the end of this term are left with a well-performing asset, and an asset which has become, again, part of the local community and the social fabric. Social enterprises from service provider to urban developer, this has been the real game changer. And as I will mention later, for social enterprises to become urban developers, it takes a bit of learning and it takes some trial and error. Should any of you be involved first hand in urban development, there's a few things that need to be fixed before you even get started. As one thing that should be fixed before you get started is to have an early engagement with non-social enterprises to balance the mixité, the social mix. So in order for a social enterprise-led development to work, it can't all be social. So there should be an element of standard for business activity in order for the area not to be felt and perceived as a kind of welfare hub, but rather has an evolved part of the city in which traditional business and more innovative, socially innovative business kind of work hand in hand and side by side. In terms of impact, it is really interesting to measure impact. The most important and most interesting part of impact can't actually be measured. We are talking about social impact, we are talking about long-term impact, we are talking about changing the perception of the third sector. And this is by far the most interesting part of the work with La Polveriera. Shift in perception of social entrepreneurship. This really truly is the game changer. Cultural and behavioral change in local population was also really interesting to notice. The fact that, services to fragile individuals and mentally disabled individuals from being cast away somewhere in the countryside was kind of brought back in the centre of town, and for some of the guests of the care home to become active part of the co-working space and the design shop. Those things affected perception and culture in the citizens, in the people living in the neighbourhood, and had enormous impact, although it's really difficult to grasp and measure. This leads to a wide-ranging benefit for the entire social cooperative movement. Learning point number 4 on fragility. Sharing the experience of human fragility with the city has been absolutely pivotal. What normally is unseen has become seen and shared with La Polveriera. Is the awareness of the level of fragility that can be shared publicly, which is the next level up in terms of awareness. Not everything can be shared and made visible. And this is a kind of the object of a frank conversation that can be that should be tabled early in the process between different social enterprises and NGOs and third sector organization. Whenever fragility is part of the mix, one should be realistic about the level of fragility that is right to share, is culturally relevant to share and important in terms of educational value, and the element of fragility that should not be shared, should not be visible for personal reasons. The crucial role of the restaurant bar co-working for the awareness and sharing. So something like a restaurant with a dense and rich program of cultural events is absolutely crucial to create that linking space between the, let's say, standard or average population in town and the socially more aware, let's put it this way, population of the hub. Understanding which is your linking space is crucial to make sure that the overall project works and that local population recognizes the space as their space. The square, the public space in front of the restaurant also works, but I suppose that the restaurant, particularly for the music and the arts, really does the trick. Financial fragility needs wider sharing beyond cooperative movement. For something this big, we talk about 4 to 5 million euro here, to work, it needs a wider engagement. It needs many people to embrace the idea. It needs private and public as well as third sector finances to align, not only to support third sector financing, but also to incorporate the standard market tools to ensure kind of a healthy cash flow and unhealthy allocation of risk. So diversity is important at all levels. As I said earlier, a social hub of this magnitude can't just be social 100%. It needs to have a diversity of users, stakeholders, and objectives. Learning points number 5 on collaboration. It's very important that something like this, which I repeat, in essence, could be described as a third sector organization becoming an urban developer, is perceived as a public-private partnership over time. Is a social private investment which deliver public social good. So this kind of complex return on investment has to become, I wouldn't say the object of a negotiation between public and private, but it has to become shared knowledge. Number 2, learning curve between private commercial and private social. As I said earlier, and I'm not going to repeat myself now, there should be collaboration between the for-profit and for social good aspects of the functional mix, and the mix should be balanced. Number 3, cooperative movement and private foundations. Private foundations, we think after 10 years doing this, should really be part of the mix. They are the right entities. They have the wide shoulders of financial assets to be deployed. They have the long-term vision of responsible investors. Cooperative movement, third sector movement should engage early on with private foundation to design the correct roadmap for this sort of project. Number 6, on regeneration. Specifically, it's all about risk management, I would say, because we learned that early integrated financial and physical modeling is crucial. We learned that early engagement with supply chain and, if possible, aligned sort of win-win collaborative tendering is important. Early risk mitigation and open books procurement is paramount, and we try to do it, and we should have done it even more. And simplicity and flexibility over time is very important. A for-profit user has a very simple linear business case. They know what they're selling. A complex entity such as a consortium of social enterprises will change their mind, will change their team, will respond to the changing needs of local population. So keep it simple because it will change. Bit of data on how the space has been used. So what you can see here is data between 2018 and 2019. After that, also because of COVID, we don't really have accurate enough data to represent. So we can see that certain functions and users skyrocketed in demand on the local market, and others slightly diminished in impact. So what has diminished? For instance, the example of active citizenship, conferences and meetings, corporate and business events. What has worked really well and skyrocketed is workshop, courses, music, cultural events, and recurring guests. So companies that like the space and want to use it for a program of various events. In terms of overall footfall, the space has grown in popularity with the local population, moving from about 15,500 visitors in 2018 to more than 23,500 visitors in 2019. So, coming to a conclusion, if you're designing something like this, what are the key words you should keep in mind? The first one is open. Open. Don't stick with a specific user group, but keep your doors open for creativity and social needs that you can't necessarily imagine when you write down your project, your business case. Connected to open is inclusive. Everyone is welcome. Everyone can provide vital insight on how the space should evolve. And absolutely keeping human. The most important network holding together such a diverse mix as represented in Polveriera is the human connection. You enter as one enters in the restaurant, let's say, it is impossible not to feel something different. And everyone I've spoken with have used the space for either organizing a wedding or having a lunch or using it for working. They all confirm that there is a different energy, there is a different atmosphere. And I think it's because it's a people-focused space. It's not a profit-focused space. And also shared. So by being open and inclusive, the space allows for users that the organizers may not think about as their start. So it's shared. Different people can use this space, they change their space, they can evolve this space with their own creativity and agendas. And perhaps most importantly is a visible space, is a space that makes a conscious effort in making visible what more often than not becomes and is kept invisible. So it is a space where fragility can be shared. It is a space where minority groups can become part of community. So I hope you found the presentation informative and interesting. And going back to the objective of the Third Sector Collaboration Week, I'll just add a few notes on the various topics that I discussed with Neil. Collaboration for innovation, it's the main objective. To collaborate, to innovate is the main objective of the conference. I would say, sharing with you the lesson learned from La Polveriera is that collaboration should expand beyond the domain of social enterprises. If and when the third sector becomes an urban developer, i.e. the proponent of urban regeneration, it's really important to get the right mix between normal business and social good. The two things need to grow together. They can't be a monoculture, if that makes sense. In terms of methodologies, I would say that a project such as La Polveriera presents a higher level of complexity, which makes the ongoing work more challenging, but equally more rewarding. It takes a certain kind of people to work effectively at this level. And as I said earlier, it is about curiosity and it is about problem solving. It's not about a linear business case that has to guarantee a certain volume of sales. It really is about constantly evolving a shared vision for a multi-tiered impact. In terms of partnership and networking, I do believe that working earlier on with the local authority, defining a long-term social value agenda, it's really important to ensure, I would say, political support beyond the domain of a single, however long, political representation for local governance. It is really important that social value is embraced as a collective benefit that should be collectively supported. Interesting points have been raised about collaborative tendering. Well, collaborative tendering is something that's quite dear to my heart. I've been working for many years in the UK on collaboration in tendering and procurement. It goes down to data, it goes down to transparency, and it goes down to open books, which only makes sense and becomes productive if there is a huge amount of work done upfront. So high-level modelling, financial modelling, kind of business case modelling, physical modelling, energy modelling. The more modelling you do beforehand, the more data you have to share with your partners in order to forecast with higher accuracy what the return or the outcome will be. And on the basis of those trajectories, it is then possible to have open books collaboration. Collaboration model adopted. I would say that the collaboration worked really well within third sector organizations. Equally, more collaboration would be beneficial involving also non-third sector organization, such as normal business or larger bodies such as private foundations. What's unique about the model? Primarily the fact that the third sector rolled up their sleeves and engaged with something really difficult, which is the conservation and reuse project of Grade 2 listed assets, and a quite tricky piece of construction. And they did that all on their own. So I think that's quite special. What's advice and plans for the future? Right now, we're all facing COVID, so the plans for the future is just to stay in business, which is particularly difficult for third sector and cooperative organization, because they don't have this lack of huge profits and margins, obviously. And the advice would be, as I mentioned in many times throughout this presentation, would be to establish what the long-term social return is in terms of social value, translate that into some sort of local authority manifesto so that the support for the project may survive a specific political alignment, and get your balance right. So make sure that you have a variety of users, tenants, activities, services, so that a third sector led urban regeneration is not only a incredibly valuable project from a social point of view, but is just really high level urban regeneration, so that the kind of old and stale model of take the money and run of normal urban regeneration is becomes something of the past. Should you need any additional information, please drop me a line at antonio.pisano@mastermar.eu, or come and visit us at La Polveriera in Reggio Emilia. So take a train, speed train to Reggio Emilia. We have a fantastic railway station, and then get a taxi or give me a call, I'll come and pick you up at the station. And hope to see you soon. And I trust and hope that this was somehow interesting and useful for you. Thank you.
So thank you very much for that, Antonio. That was really interesting. It's now time for a short discussion just to pick up on some points that you spoke about in your presentation. So I'm going to start off with a question around the consortium model that is adopted in the project. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? You kind of mentioned that the consortium was in existence already. So do you think that was pivotal to the success?
Absolutely, yes. So La Polveriera is the name of the area. Polveriera in Italian means powder keg. That's where the weapons used to be stored. La Polveriera also, it is now the name of the company running basically the real estate project. So the urban regeneration project. La Polveriera is an expression of Consorzio Oscar Romero. And Consorzio Oscar Romero truly is the hero and the pioneer of the entire project. It is very important to say that the consortium predates the project. It's been around for decades. And the fact that all organizations involved in the project were part of the consortium was a great enabler for collaboration. You know, values, culture, objectives, to a certain extent, language was shared, and this just simplified management, which was crucial. You know, as you say, was it pivotal? Absolutely, yes, it was pivotal. It would have been harder to do the same project without this overarching body.
Yeah, because you had kind of structures in place and processes in place already, so that would have been very helpful. So moving on to another aspect of your presentation where you speak about fragility. So I was wanting to ask, how do you think that is complemented with the business side, your business model, and then how is that leading to social impact specifically, or what social impact do you think that helps to achieve?
I think the point on fragility is actually quite complex and possibly quite a deep one. I think pandemic and climate change confront us with fragility. You know, we are reminded how fragile our culture is. More specifically, in our project, we are quite proud to say that the project La Polveriera makes fragility visible. So highlights the existence of fragility, reminds ourselves that we are fragile, and some of us are slightly more fragile than others. Equally, from social fragility, there is an aspect of business fragility the project cannot ignore. As I mentioned in the presentation, the urban regeneration project is quite ambitious. We're talking about 6 million euro of investment. Multi-tenant real estate management, a very large kind of listed, grade 2 listed asset to work with. To do all of that without a single, let's say, standard for-profit partner and kind of business partner made crunching the numbers a little harder. You know, without a slack of profit and dividends and all those aspects, running the show becomes slightly harder. So how do you complement, how do you kind of offset that fragility? I would say first, going back to the first answer, with a culture, you know, making the team, creating a team so that people have a certain instinct for complexity. And also primarily they are problem-solving people. And second, you really need to have a quite refined and meticulous business case. As I perhaps mentioned in the presentation, the landlord is the local authority. The operator and the investor is the third sector consortium, Oscar Romero. They have 50 years plus 10 of lease at, you know, at a very reasonable rental yearly rate, which will allow them to basically just recoup their investment. There's no profit involved here. In order to meet those targets, the management needs to be quite sharp, because as I said, not having that for-profit aspect in your bottom line just makes crunching the numbers a little bit harder. So there is an element of financial fragility that requires more work.
Thank you for that. And I think many social enterprises or third sector organisations in Scotland would very much agree with that. The business side needs to be watertight in order to be successful. And it's a careful balance. You mentioned in your presentation about how you were successful without relying on grants. So I wonder if you could tell me a bit more about that, because there's, to give you a bit of context, I suppose, in Scotland in the third sector and with social enterprises, despite the fact that social enterprises have an aim of being self-sufficient, many are still very reliant on grants. Many projects are still very reliant on it. So how did you manage to be successful within that?
I think it's important to clarify the various bodies and entities involved in the project. As much as the consortium had their finances kind of looked at almost as a private proponent. So they had direct access to banks. There was a substantial amount of capital investment from the organizations that are members of the consortium. It doesn't necessarily mean that the organizations themselves have perhaps their own funding programs. Because it's so big and the roots are so widely spread, it's kind of hard to keep track or individually of the business models of each one of those organizations involved. For instance, the organization who provide services to disabled people, they have, you would say in the UK, be like a convention, like a program, a deal with the equivalent of the NHS, with Servizio Sanitario Nazionale. So, part of their services is kind of supported and funded. Having said that, it is fair to say that the urban regeneration project was managed, as any other developer would do. So working out a overall cost for the works, future users, future sales, and trying to find quite a long period of time in which the payback function would eventually show some figures in the black, not in the red. So I think, how do you make this possible? I would say, without having, like enormous European grants sort of thing, how do you make it possible? I think you work with different timescales. And I think working with different timescales should be interesting. And if it is not, I think there's something collectively we should do. Should be interesting for certain type of investment funds. If I think about pension, for instance, or other forms of very structured and stable investment funds, or as I mentioned in my presentation, like private foundations. Those bodies should have a set of values which are in tune, in line with an organization such as the Consorzio Oscar Romero. So how do you make that possible? Working with different timing, and if possible, still try to align with like a private foundation or socially minded investors.
And there are similar things here in Scotland that would mean that you wouldn't have to rely on public grants. There is like social investment here.
Yeah.
There's a few different sources of that. Although sometimes it's argued that social investment here perhaps is not as favourable as it could be to social enterprise. Perhaps some people actually argue that it's less favourable than high street banks or financial institutions. So again,
it's time, isn't it? It's always about time. Sorry to kind of jeopardize your flow of Q&A, but I think really is about time. Is how long is the financing bridge in place for, and what's the rate and what's expected from a social proponent. And I think that really is the difference between a normal lending mechanism and a social one. But I agree, sometimes, you know, social investment has got worse conditions that, as you say, high street banks.
Thanks for that. So we're speaking to you today because we have been inspired by the model that's been adopted where you are. Would you be able to speak to us about how you've inspired maybe other organizations, or you've seen similar partnership projects emerge as a result of your work or the work of La Polveriera?
La Polveriera has been around for about 10 years. And in these 10 years, we've been asked to present the model and present the lesson learned a few times. It is hard for me just to, you know, pin down exactly a similar project. It is hard for me to say that. But what I can say that I've seen an emergence of third sector led projects similar to this, and I could just, every single time I was made aware of a project similar to La Polveriera, always the same issues emerged. So we touched on at the beginning of the Q&A session on the importance of the consortium. And that is a huge lesson learned. The fact that there is a pre-existing body which has a culture, has a language, has a set of values, is definitely one of the secrets, one of the reasons for success of the project. The other element, I would say, it was flexibility, simplicity and flexibility. Although the project from a design point of view has a certain ethos, a certain character, we try to keep the box as flexible as possible for new creativity, new ideas to emerge and improve from what we left at the end of the real estate regeneration project. So it is tricky. It is tricky to pull off something that big, and it's very important to have this kind of pre-existing intelligence like the consortium. Definitely, there is a tendency for third sector organization to either kind of piggyback along pre-existing projects as a sort of quota of social value in normal project, or when we do it independently, there is, I think it's easier also from a business planning point of view to focus on meanwhile spaces and temporary accommodation. So, you know, let's say there is a vacant site for a certain number of years, and the third sector organization moves in and creates social value by activating that part of town. That works really well, and I would say it's perhaps a slightly simpler model. What made this project kind of unique 10 years ago and still today, I think, is the main reason for, you know, the main reason we wanted to share the lesson learned is that specifically for La Polveriera, we have quite a big €6 million urban regeneration project entirely managed and delivered and, you know, fought for by the third sector.
Mm-hmm. I think many third sector organizations here would like to hear that you can do something that can be third sector led, third sector delivered, and it doesn't maybe necessarily have to involve public.
Yeah.
So I'm going to finish up by asking you a final question about the challenges which you feel are unique to Reggio Emilia that the project seeks to address.
In order to answer that question, I need to kind of share with you an element which is specific to Reggio Emilia and that specific part of the Mirabello neighborhood where the project took place. The Polveriera area, as I mentioned in the presentation, was a military area. It was completely fenced off. There was no chance you could cross it. And it's been like that since it was built in 1946. Suddenly, making such part of quite a problematic neighborhood accessible and open could have been triggering all sorts of reactions. People might have been pleased by being able to walk through, but not necessarily feeling part of it, not necessarily embracing this new project as an extension of their home neighborhood. And so what was specific to that was the fact that we were opening up a military area with 100% social value led content. We created a public space, which, as I said, was simple, was generic enough to allow for different users, from concerts to people, little kids playing around on the scooters and bicycles, and elderly citizens. But we had no idea that would work. Also because pretty much 100% of the content is third sector, kind of fragility oriented and kind of social value led. It's not your usual new part of town. You know, it hasn't got fancy new shops and big glamorous Italian brands. So that was a bet, which I feel has been largely won. And I feel that the most important aspect of the project, getting back to your point about impact, really is about visibility, making fragility visible, you know, allowing third sector organizations such as Cores, who does, or Mestieri, helping fragile individuals into society, give them a place right in the middle of town, allowing the users to be part of the local urban community rather than somehow located in a lower rent, more remote building asset or location. So making fragility visible, creating a hugely diverse social community, giving new access and new character and new life to a former military area, which was completely inaccessible. Those elements were ambitious and challenging, and I think also represents the most important element of impact.
So, thank you very much for that. And that's all we have time for today. Special thanks to Antonio, who's taken the time out of his day to not only do the pre-recording, but also to do this Q&A with us afterwards. And if you haven't already, please check out the program for Collaboration Week on the P4P website. There is lots on, and there's something to suit everyone, including live events and webinars, pre-recorded sessions like these, videos, podcasts, graphics, and blogs. And if you'd like to speak to a member of the P4P team, you can contact me or the rest of the P4P team using the Contact Us form on the P4P website or by emailing info@p4p.org.uk. Thanks again, and bye for now. And thank you, Antonio.
Thank you. Bye.